What is the weirdest, creepiest, unexplained thing you've ever encountered? When I was about 8, I woke up at my grandparents' house to my cousin saying, "Wake up, let's play hide and go seek." I looked around, couldn't find her. She said, "Don't quit, come and find me." I searched high and low. She spoke to me in all different parts of the house. Finally I burst into my parents' room and said, "Is Ellen hiding in here?" And they said, "She isn't coming until tomorrow." My husband and I had a cool portrait painted of a friend who passed away. One night we were talking about him and our dog, who was sound asleep, got up, went over to the painting and started barking at it. Our dog did this to a painting we had once. Turns out there were a lot of centipedes living inside the frame. It was as much of a nightmare as you are probably imagining. When we discovered them, seeing all the supernatural replies on here. Maybe mine doesn't fit, but oh well. I lived in a shady neighborhood for about 10 years. One day at like 3 p.m. I was out walking my dog. A guy came up to me in a rush. There was a huge bulge under his shirt. It was moving around. And his shirt was soaking wet. It was a white shirt. No blood. Just wet. He asked me, "Do you know where the native center is?" There was nothing like that anywhere near us. And I told him so. He turned and ran, holding the animal comma in his shirt, yelling "Shi-I-I-I-I-I-I-I-I-I." He turned a corner and he was gone. It wasn't scary, but it was definitely unexplained. One night, I was laying on my bed with the window open, and it was around 2 a.m. On the road outside, I heard an ice cream truck go by, with its music and everything. Then a couple seconds after that, I heard a police car drive by in the same direction with its sirens going off. I'll never know what illegal activities someone was doing with an ice cream truck at 2 in the morning. Edit, typo. As a teenager, my parents moved into another house because our previous one caught fire. One morning I woke up smelling breakfast. I'm like, hell yeah, mom's cooking pancakes, bacon and eggs. I mean, the smell was right on the money. My brother and I get up to see no one cooking and my mom asleep. Okay, whatever. Tell my mom about it later and she looks crazy shocked. Sad the landlord told her jokingly about it being haunted by an old lady that cooks breakfast sometimes. She never told us until then. Only time it ever happened. My one nipple is constantly itchy. Doctors can't explain it. The internet can't explain it. I'm just doomed to scratch my right nipple for eternity. One time I was in my backyard playing with a plastic toy dinosaur. Loved that thing. I tossed it up into the sky. And then it never fell back down. I never saw it again. One night, during college, I woke at about 2:30 a.m. I can't explain why, but I immediately jumped out of bed and started getting dressed. I was completely dressed and just starting to wonder what I was doing when the phone rang. It was one of my best friends. She said she had tried acid at a party earlier and was on a bad trip. She was terrified of everything and had been hiding under a table for about half an hour, trying to get to the phone to call me. Somehow, I knew and was getting ready to go get her before she even called for help. I still don't know how to explain that. It's almost midnight. I shouldn't have come here. I can't tell you how many times I've made the mistake of reading these creepiest threads before bed and then I get too scared to sleep, so I end up being awake super late with nothing to do but read more people's creepiest stories. One time I was running early in the morning before high school. It was 6 a.m.ish and still dark out as it was the late fall. I lived in a town in Ohio with one side surrounded by trees. As I'm coming up an uphill curvy road in my community, I notice what has been placed on the guardrail. There were about 10 raggedy children's stuffed animals stapled to the posts. I was running before, but I was sprinting away after that. I told my father, who was on city council, about it and he talked to the Parks and Rec employees. Apparently they take them down and someone puts new ones back up every week. In a pretty sleepy town, this was a really freaking weird thing to see. Edit, no chit died there during that time, or in the 10 years prior to when I saw them. This town is very small, I definitely would have heard about that. I'm gonna talk to some of my friends this weekend and see if they know of any other reason for a memorial. A few years ago, I was at home with my parents and sister. My sister and I were sitting on the couch in the living room, facing the kitchen, and my parents were in the TV room, to the left of the kitchen. My sister and I heard a noise in the kitchen, but shrugged it off. My mom approached us and asked if we'd heard that noise. We instantly felt a sense of dread and said yes. In that instant, all three of us saw a black shadow float at the top of the entryway of the kitchen, then disappear. I walked over to the kitchen, peeked in, and saw that every cabinet was wide open. I hated that house after that. When I was little, our house had an upstairs apartment that my grandfather lived in. My grandfather would sit in the front window smoking, drinking coffee and just watching the neighborhood. He was very sick from cancer and died in our house. A few months later, a new family moved into the house across the street from us. The wife and my mom became friends. One day the lady across the street asked my mom who the old guy was that lived upstairs and would sit in the window smoking and drinking coffee. No one had moved in upstairs. I was in the bathroom at Subway. In the garbage can beside the toilet I saw a cooked hot dog on top of an open package of uncooked hot dogs, the one missing being the cooked one. To this day I want to know what happened. I once went to Disney World when I was about 10 or 11. When I came out of the Haunted Mansion ride, there were lipstick kiss marks all over my face. I did not feel anything during it and I was riding with my little brother, who was not wearing lipstick. Still freaks me out to this day. I was in a brand new apartment that had white carpet. This was before I moved anything in, so the apartment was completely empty. I had to replace a light bulb, so I was standing on a stepladder, unscrewing the glass dome with a large black and yellow screwdriver when the screwdriver slipped out of my hands. I saw it hit my elbow. Then I turned my head away so it wouldn't hit me in the eyes. Didn't feel anything, so I figured it must have bounced away from my body after hitting my elbow. But I never heard it hit the floor. So, again, this is in a completely empty apartment, with white carpet floors, and I just dropped a black screwdriver. Except I never once heard the screwdriver hit the floor, and it just went missing. I never did find that screwdriver. When I was a dumb young kid, I was on the phone with a friend late at night and some guy called up and said he was with the phone company and they were doing work on my block. He described my block perfectly and said he wanted to verify my address. I probably should have said you guys should know that already, but again, dumb young kid. I continued talking to my friend and started to regret giving this stranger any info. He called back maybe 20 minutes later and said, "Matt, are you scared yet? Never found out who that was, how they knew my name, and why they were messing with me." When I was about 8 years old, I fell asleep and had what I can only relate as a 90 Toys commercial on an bad acid trip. It was a close-up of a snarling Doberman that was covered in neon colors, and in a second it had bit me on my arm. I jerked awake and my arm was in extreme pain. I looked at my arm and I was bleeding and what appeared to be bite mark in my arm that could have only happened if I was holding my arm in a defensive position defending myself from something. The bite mark had elongated canines and was bleeding. We never did or ever would own a dog. My dad also told me a story that always creeped him out. Shortly after I just started to walk, my dad woke up one morning, and he came to get me out of my crib. When he got there, I was nowhere to be seen. He went downstairs to see if maybe somehow I was down there. Nope. He looked around until he finally noticed the front door and screen door were both unlocked and wide open, deadbolts and all. He feared the worst. So he ran outside and found me in the bed of his Ford F-250 truck bawling my eyes out. Edit. Thanks to you Azav for the correction. One time when I was on a 15-hour drive I had to pull over at a rest stop to get some sleep. I quickly passed out and had the strangest dream of people trying to kill me at a rest stop. When I woke up from the dream, there was a smiley face on the inside of my windshield. Needless to say, I hauled it the second I woke up. This actually has a pretty reasonable explanation. You've had a passenger sitting there before, maybe several days or weeks ago, who got bored and drew a smiley on the window. When you went to sleep that night, the windows started fogging up again and the smiley got visible. This is why my dad always got mad if my sister and I drew on the windows. When I was about 12, my mother's friend asked her and her other church friends to visit his house and pray over it. Ever since he had moved in, he had seen dark shapes, smelled bad things, experienced cold spots, heard voices, and his wife had been acting weird. My mother took me with her because, I presume, I had nowhere else to go. Whoever had lived in the house before had drawn weird symbols in the garage, such as the all-seeing eye, and the whole place just had a very uncomfortable presence. This man had never stepped foot in his storm cellar. This is Oklahoma, so it's separate from the house, and the shelter just had an evil feeling emanating from it. They all decided to open it, not thinking there would be anything there. When they opened it, there were dozens of dried up dead cats and chickens that apparently had been sacrificed. This is in the city, so no real reason to have chickens down there. It was just a terrible, evil feeling. My dad told me a story once about my grandfather. My grandfather passed away when my mom was about 10. One day my dad was working in the garage when he got a phone call. He picked it up and the call said, "Hi, Dad's name." "It's grandfather's name." They talked a bit and my grandfather said to tell my mom that he was proud of her. He hung up. And when my dad tried to call back, the number didn't exist. Me and a friend were walking through a trail around 1 or 2 AM one night. I start getting a really bad being watched vibe, so I keep my hand tight on the knife I carry. She grabs my arm and starts crying that something doesn't feel right and she doesn't want to walk farther. I agree and I give her our flashlight and tell her I'll keep my eyes peeled on our back. Interestingly enough, that path leads through the grounds of an old Revolution battlefield that's supposedly haunted. I couldn't sleep one night, so I took some Ambien, which is known for causing hallucination. Before I started hallucinating, I saw a black figure in my room and started to freak out. A few months later, I have a roommate move in and he tells me he sees it at night, but only in my room. Doors will close and drawers will be open. It's creepy to think my room is solely the most haunted room in the house. Edit, roommate and I saw this figure, but I didn't tell him about my experiences with doors closing, drawers opening at all before he told me what he was experiencing. Other people who were also past roommates experienced stuff, but my room always had the drawer problem. I'm not sure if this counts, but it happened last week and really creeped me out. I was friends with a girl when I was a teenager. Not best friends, but we went to the same school and I would go over and hang out in her house after school sometimes. She was extremely quiet in school and had no friends, so her mom would often ask my mom to send me round so she would have someone to hang out with. I didn't mind cause she was quite funny and talked a bit when it was just the two of us. Anyway, we fell out of touch a long time ago and I haven't spoken to her or seen her in years, like 15 years I'd say. Last week I was at my desk in work and she just popped into my head for some reason. I was just working and I thought of her. Specifically, my thought was, is XXX alive or dead? I don't know why I thought that specifically. So I made a mental note to ask my mom next time we spoke. Then 2 days later I got an email from my mom. A bit of sad news. XXX died on Monday. It creeped me right out. My logical mind tells me it's just a weird coincidence, but it really shook me when I got the email. I haven't thought of her in so long. And it was the day she died that she pops into my head. When I was about 8, I had one of those loft beds. One night I woke up around 3 AM and the top of my hand was super itchy. Scratched it and a bunch of slimy stuff scratched off and it hurt worse than anything I had ever experienced. I started screaming and crying and my mom ran into the room and flicked the lights on. The skin on top of my hand had a serious burn and my skin had basically melted off. It was disgusting. My bed was nowhere near an outlet. and my bedroom light was in the middle of the room away from my bed and off. My mom searched everything in the house but nothing was even remotely warm. Oven, stove, baseboard, heaters, etc. There's no evidence I even left my room. I had a nice scar for a few years but it's faded to pretty much nothing unless I get really tanned. No idea.